Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. We're going to start with brief introductions. We'll just go in the order that's on this slide we're looking at. My name is Michael Scholenbeck. I'm the public health librarian.
Sorry about that. I was trying to scroll and making a mess here. My name is Maria Pretzelis, and I am a product manager at the California Digital Library, where I work in research data management. I do a lot of work with DMPs and federal funders, so looking forward to talking about that with all of you. I guess Erin's next.
Hi, I'm Erin Foster. I'm the service lead for the Research Data Management Program here at Berkeley, which is a partnership between Research IT and the Berkeley Library.
And hi, everyone. I'm Heather Amato. I'm a PhD student in environmental health sciences, but I'm also a domain consultant for Research IT, assisting with research data management and computing.
Thank you all. Next slide, please. So here's a brief agenda of what we're going to do today. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. Someone will be looking at those, and there should be time at the end as well after our presentation. We'll talk a little bit about what is a DMP, what's going on with NIH, why you need to care, and how you can get help about that. Next slide, please. So if you don't mind, and it's not required, of course, if you wouldn't mind putting who you are and where you're from in the chat, why you're interested in DMPs. We'll just take a minute or so to do that. So if folks wouldn't mind introducing themselves. It's well known that people who come to DMP presentations are shy. Oh, here we go. Excellent. Fabulous. Okay. If anyone is left, oh, here we go. All right. Next slide, please. So as Erin mentioned, the Berkeley Research Data Management Program is a partnership between the library and Research IT. We help researchers, meaning faculty, students, or staff, navigate the landscape of managing data through the research process. We offer consulting, training on a variety of areas, ranging from planning your research, finding data, handling active storage, file and data management during your research process, helping you decide how your data will be shared or kept long-term. We often partner with Berkeley and other UC-wide groups like California Digital Library today to host workshops and trainings on these topics. Next slide, please, Maria.
All right, so my name is Maria Pretzelis, and again, I'm with the California Digital Library. So we work out of the Office of the President, and we work with all of the different UC campus libraries. We were founded in 1996, and really the goal of CDL is to amplify the impacts of libraries, scholarship, and all of the resources that are produced at the University of California. So the department that I work at within CDL is UC3. So UC3 does a number of different things that probably touch on your work in various ways. Really, we're focused on maintaining, preserving, and adding value to digital research data throughout the whole life cycle of projects. So that includes things like research data management, which is my little piece of that world. But we also work in data publication. We do a lot of work around data metrics, persistent identifiers, digital preservation, and data and software skills training for librarians. And I'll talk a little bit more about the RDM and data publication services later on in our workshop.
So what is a data management plan, or DMP, as we'll be saying throughout today? Next slide, please. So DMPs help you organize and manage your research data throughout the life of a project. DMPs facilitate data sharing, which the NIH sees as critical to accelerating research discovery. Next slide, please. So a question for you all is, have any of you worked with any of these entities or other entities where a DMP is required? And so you can just poke a yes or no, or as much detail as you like in the chat. But these are some entities that have some mandates on open publication, open data, or both. Okay, a mix of yeses and nos and not yets. Fabulous. Next slide, please. So what is a good DMP? Clear and organized, includes plans for the data after the research is complete. Most federal data management plans stress data sharing and data preservation. Only data that has been well managed during the research phase will be ready to share after a work is completed. Funders want to see that you are committed to supporting your data during this phase so others can build off it when you're done. Next slide, please.
Alrighty, so now I'm going to jump in and talk about the NIH requirements for data sharing, specifically really focusing on the upcoming requirements for data sharing that are coming down the pike. So before we look at what's coming, currently, for those of you who I saw several people who are working on NIH-funded works right now, you're operating under this 2003 NIH data sharing policy. This is for projects that are 500,000 or more, so pretty big projects. That does qualify that any data produced should be released no later than the date of associated publication acceptance. Clinical trial data is encouraged, but not currently required to be submitted to clinicaltrials.gov. And data sharing and archiving costs are considered research costs under this current policy. This policy was expanded in 2008 in the sort of related NIH public access policy. And this is really looking at published results of NIH-funded research. So ensuring that people can have open access to these published results. So that's requiring that any NIH-funded work is required to submit a peer-reviewed journal manuscript to PubMed Central upon acceptance to publication. And sort of the far end date is 12 months after publication. So that's currently in effect as well. There is a 2014 genomic data sharing policy as well, and this applies to all NIH-funded research that generates large-scale human or non-human genomic data. So any researchers in those categories need to write a basic genomic data sharing plan with their funding application. Data and any sort of relevant documentation associated with that need to be shared in public repositories in a timely manner. So this is NSF or NIH generally kind of gives these flexible terms. So generally that is considered to be the time of acceptance of publication. They say that the institute or center for this project will review compliance with the plan at the annual progress report check-ins. Researchers also need to plan for informed consent for human data, obviously in forms of data sharing. So what I'm really focusing on today is the new NIH data management and sharing policy, which is much more broad, and also they've spent a lot of time thinking about the various components of this policy and some of the terms. The format is different, and we'll walk through that today in this workshop. So this comes into play January 25th, 2023, which feels like a million years from now, but it's not. And definitely in terms of NIH funding and how long it can take to get these projects rolling, it's not that far off. So people really need to be aware of these changes and requirements now so that they can plan for projects that are coming up. So this new policy requires researchers to submit a plan outlining how their data from research will be managed and shared. That's in the form of a no more than two-page text narrative. So it's not, a very long document, but there's a lot of information that they expect to be contained within that document, what we'll talk about. They're really coming from the angle that researchers should be maximizing the sharing of scientific data. They definitely have a lot of understanding and language in there for dealing with sensitive data or data with PII, and we'll talk about that coming up. But whenever possible, they are operating under the expectation that researchers will share whenever possible. And also that data should be shared as soon as possible. And again, they set that outer limit as no later than the time of associated publication or the end of a performance period. So whatever comes first. It's also important to know that what we're talking about today, these are the minimum requirements for any NIH institute or center. So specific centers may have more robust data management or sharing policies. And so in that case, you would need to go with your specific center or institute. But this is kind of the minimum requirement that will flow for any NIH institute or center. So the elements of this plan, again, it's 2 pages. It's going to be going into these specific sections, and I'll outline them now. So before we jump in, one thing that they did, which I think was really useful and actually not something that I've seen other federal funders do, is spend some time defining what they mean by scientific data. Because data can be in various formats, can be very broad as a term. So here they've defined that it is factual material commonly accepted in the community as of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings. Important in this definition is that they're saying regardless of whether the data was used to support scholarly publication. So it doesn't need to be associated with a publication to be considered scientific data and to be considered covered under this policy. I think it's really helpful that they also defined what scientific data is not. So it's not lab notebooks, it's not completed case forms, it's not drafts, it's not correspondence, it's not specimens or physical objects. So that was, and they go on kind of in their documentation, but that's kind of a summary there. So in this first section of a DMP, when you're looking at data types, you're looking at summarizing the types of data, the amount, the quantity. You're saying which data is needing to be preserved or shared. So here NIH is saying they don't expect researchers to save or to preserve everything or to make everything available. You're expected to maximize the appropriate sharing of scientific data and to really use this section to explain your justification for how you've selected those data types to be preserved. This is also where you would say what metadata or associated documentation, like maybe protocols, will be made to facilitate interpretation of the data. You might also in this section talk about collecting sensitive data and how you're handling that, and we'll talk more about sensitive data in just a minute. So the next section is related tools, software, and code. This is also where I think they've been more forward thinking than some other agencies in the way that they've acknowledged the fact that it's not just data. If it's data that's reliant on a script or code in order to access it, you need to have a policy that encompasses those resources as well. So here they're asking you to talk about any specialized tools that you may need to access or manipulate data to support replication or reuse. To talk about, sorry, how those tools can be accessed, and are they likely to remain available for as long as the scientific data is available? So it's a big, broad, and very important area. One thing I wanted to point out that might be useful to folks is the data repository Dryad, which Berkeley has a membership and you all have access to. I'm sure some of you have probably used Dryad to submit data sets previously. They have a new feature which allows you to, when you're submitting data for your creation and publication, you can also upload any code or scripts or software that are associated with it. So it's a nice kind of package where you can not only get your data into, a trusted data repository, but you can also upload any code or associated scripts that are needed to work with that data. So it's a great new feature. If you're putting your things in Dryad, I would definitely encourage you to look at that. With standards, you're really looking at what metadata could be provided to other down the road users to help identify and reuse the data. So here you might be thinking about data dictionaries or identifiers or other data documentation to help guide reuse. So with standards, NIH is a strong proponent of using community developed standards whenever possible. They do have it stipulated in their policy that if there isn't kind of a corresponding metadata standard for your community or discipline, they recognize that as a reality still, and that you just need to document it in your DMP. Erin has been typing in links, thank you, Erin, to some of the things that I'm talking about here. So there's a directory of metadata standards that's put together by the Research Data Alliance that might be useful to you in figuring out what would be an appropriate or a useful metadata standard for your data type. With data preservation, access, and associated timelines, this is where you're going to look at what research data repositories are you going to use for your data. How is your data going to be findable and identifiable? This is really, really important to NIH. They've done a lot of thinking about appropriate data repositories. They've put a lot of emphasis on the need for persistent identifiers for data sets. So this is an important thing to clarify in your DMP. So here I wanted to talk a little bit about how do you select data repositories. So there are lots of data repositories. NIH put together kind of a directory of open domain specific data sharing repositories that you can take a look at to identify something specific to your subject area. There are also NIH supported repositories as well. So they aren't being prescriptive. They're not saying you need to put it in X, Y, and Z repository. What they've done is put together some guides to help facilitate picking the right place for your data types. The other kind of good resource for this is working with your library staff. many of who are on this call today, who can help you find the best repository for your data. Again, if there isn't a domain-specific repository that makes sense for your type of data, the Dryad Generalist repository is another option, and that is covered through UC Berkeley funding. So you don't need to add any additional funds to upload your data and have it be curated through Dryad. With access, distribution, and reuse, this is where you're going to be really defining any extenuating factors that might affect access or reuse. So this would be things where you're going to be addressing things like informed consent. They do stress that several times in their policy when it comes to data sharing. How are you ensuring privacy and confidentiality? Is de-identification an issue with your data sets, and how will that be handled? If access to the data needs to be controlled, how is that being handled? And if that is the case, you might need to go into a data repository that can kind of accommodate that level of access. So NIH didn't create any new policies around these. They're all working with existing policies like HIPAA, policies to do with tribal data or state data. So they just expect that within this section of the document, you define the parameters that you're working within that it pertains to your research. Finally, with oversight and management and sharing, this is where you're going to outline all of the roles and responsibilities for all activities associated with research data management. So who's going to be doing data capture, who's in charge of quality, data quality, storage and backup, archiving. They do ask that those individuals be named when possible. And for collaborative projects, if you're working on a very big project that maybe is multi-institutional or across different departments, it should explain how the coordination of data management will happen across partners and across institutions. There was another resource, hopefully I gave it to Erin, that actually kind of outlines some best practices for defining roles and responsibilities for data management. So you've put together this fabulous DMP. I guess the next question is who's going to be looking at it and how is it going to be enforced? This is a policy that is new for NIH. So we're just going off of their stated documents and we haven't seen how it will play out in real life. But what they have said they're going to do is that NIH program staff will assess the plans and grant reviewers can comment on the proposed budget for data management and sharing. It's really important to know that these plans will be part of the terms and conditions for awards. So it's part of that contract. And non-compliance can result in the termination of an award, and it can impact your future funding decisions. They've stated that compliance will be monitored by the relevant institute during the program reports. So when it comes to paying for it, they do have a file that kind of walks you through specific components of the budget, but at a high level, they have said that the included costs that are payable include the curating data and developing supporting documentation. So that would be documentation to foster kind of long-term discoverability and findability and reuse. If there are local data management considerations, like any kind of specialized infrastructure that's needed to provide local management and preservation. So this would be kind of the phase before it goes into a data repository, the active research phase. And then finally, costs involving preserving and sharing data through established repositories. So if there's a deposit fee to put something into, a domain-specific data repository, it can't cover that. The important thing to know about that is because of the way NIH funding works, you have to pay it up front. You can't continue to pay it after the performance period is over. So after your grant is over, they can't continue to fund you to pay for that data to be deposited. So you'd have to pay the costs up front. I wanted to point out this great report that was put together last year. If you're really interested in costing for kind of biomedical data and how you can kind of forecast how much managing that data will cost. It's very complicated, a lot of unknowns in that world. So the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine last year kind of came together and put together this really great report that looks at some of the information we do have about estimating the costs of managing this data. So encourage you to have a look if that's of interest to you. So that's kind of the NIH at a high level, all of the changes that are coming down the pike and things to be aware of for upcoming policy requirements. So with that in mind, we wanted to switch over and talk about what resources are available to help you put together a good DMP and start thinking about how you can plan your future projects. So I mentioned I'm at the California Digital Library, and one of the things I do there is manage an application called the DMP tool. And we are a web-based platform. It's free for anyone. And it just allows users to create a DMP. We've got templates for all of the big federal funders. We have private foundations, international funders as well. And so for each template, we have associated guidance that helps kind of walk people through how to answer certain questions. We don't give you the answers on how to answer them, but we give you some guidance about what do they mean by some of these terms, where might you go to find more information about some of these topics. So this is just a screenshot of the homepage. You can sign in with your regular Berkeley credentials. The sign in is top right. We've got, again, all of the funders here. If you just want to get a quick snapshot of what's coming, you can actually just download the template so you can see what the questions are for any of these federal funders. This is the NIH data sharing plan. I just wanted to give you a peek at what it looks like when you're actually in the kind of edit mode. Here, there's the main sections that we just went over in detail. When you click into any of them here in data type, this is the little text box. You can pop in your answer. Over here on the right, this is where I was saying we've put in NIH guidance about what's the NIH policy regarding this, what are their rules pertaining to this question, what do they mean? And then some DMP tool help as well that the editorial board and myself kind of put together to give additional guidance. And that's my bit. I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Great. Thank you, Maria. So yeah, I'm going to round out by talking about a particular unit on campus that I'm part of, the Research IT unit, that can help you with some of the sort of computing and data technologies consulting questions or assistance you may need. So I think many of you on this call may be familiar with Research IT, but for those of you who aren't, so Research IT provides research data and computing technologies, consulting and community for the Berkeley campus. We often act as sort of interfaces between researchers and the different options on campus when it comes to different tools or systems and platforms, different best practices when it comes to data management. As many of you know, campus has a lot of tools spread out across a lot of different units. And so our goal is to really help you identify and navigate which one fits you best. And particularly when it comes to Research IT, if there's a cloud, high performance computing, virtual machine solution, or on the sort of data management side of the house, any data management guidance or practices that we can assist with throughout the research process. And in particular, we have expertise on topics, obviously around data management, but also around data security, and really are working more and more in trying to help researchers understand and deal with the sensitivity of the data that they're using and figure out how to use it, back it up, and sort of sufficiently protect it. Next slide, please. So research IT is made up of two parts, basically, consulting and technology. So on the consulting side, as Heather sort of alluded to, we have a team of experts from across domains to help facilitate sort of access to these computing and data resources that support research. The consultants are made up of research IT staff, so folks like myself, librarians, such as Michael, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab folks, domain experts like Heather, students also like Heather. Often these were the first point of contact for researchers in some ways, and we hope to help researchers leverage these computing and data resources to better understand aspects of their research and figure out how best to make things fit. We also provide education and outreach. So we develop training and outreach materials and different responses to researcher needs, and then of course host sessions such as this as requested. And finally, we work to document solutions to research challenges. So working to contribute to existing documentation, expanding documentation on systems or different research needs in order to develop use cases and help inform service development on campus. So on the technology side of things, there's a number of platforms and systems that we support. Some of you may be familiar with Savio, which is the high performance computing cluster on campus. And or AOD, you may be familiar with AOD, which is the virtual machine environments on demand service. We are currently running a service trial of REDCap. I think there are a couple of folks on this call who are intimately familiar with that as well. And this is REDCap, if you're not familiar, is a secure data capture collection tool. And we are working with a handful of researchers at this point, some of whom are in public health, school of public health, to get projects up on REDCap and kind of assess needs for us to establish a broader, ideally broader campus service for this. And last but not least is the SRDC, the Secure Research Data and Compute Platform, which is a computing platform designed specifically for researchers that are working with data classified as P4 or highly sensitive data. Since we know this is an area of interest, particularly to school public health, and again, some of you on this call are working in SRDC and or maybe on your way to, I did want to spend the last couple of slides to talk a little bit about working with sensitive data and SRDC in particular. So the next slide, please. So as researchers, it's, I think, more important than ever, and there's more of an expectation than ever that researchers are sort of adequately classifying or understanding the sensitivity levels of their data in order to appropriately secure it. So identifying data classification early on is super important to determine what platforms, systems, tools that you can use for data collection, for analysis and computation, for storage, et cetera. So UC uses a P1 through P4 data classification standard across the campuses that help determine how sensitive research data is. So that system of classification is implemented by campus. So here on Berkeley, the Information Security Office is the group that's responsible for implementing that standard. And Research IT, and particularly through the Research Data Management Program, has been partnering with ISO and other groups on campus, like the Industry Alliances Office, to help work with and help sort of steward and partner with researchers through this data classification process. So ideally from the onset of research, we work with researchers to figure out, okay, what's the type of data you're working with? What are the different elements or variables you're collecting? And then ensure that that data receives a data classification, and that then on the next step is determining the best systems, tools that are available on campus to appropriately secure the data and support the research that you need to do. So different systems and tools have different sort of classification or approved for different levels of data classification. And so that's where we really try and step in and help make that clear. So on the next slide with the Secure Research Data and Compute Platform, it is a platform that's explicitly been developed to handle P4 level data and to really fill a gap on campus when it comes to infrastructure support for researchers that are working with that level of data. So some of you, as I said, attending are probably quite familiar, and I've heard us talk about this at different venues and different points of time. But it is currently a platform that is available for use. There is going to be a sort of formal launch within the next month or so, but it is available if you are interested or would like to use it for your research. I'll get into some more details on the next slide, but I did want to mention just up front that the baseline capacity and support for SRDC is offered free of charge. And this is really made possible through campus support with campus leadership and strategic partnerships. Since this does address such a need on campus, the goal is really to make it as available as possible to researchers. And then I will also shout out Heather in this instance, because Heather, in addition to being a student and in her copious free time, does work with research IT, and specifically is really working on the SRDC service. So since she's here today, if there are specific questions that get into the nitty gritty, I'll probably punt them to her. But it is also nice to have the representation from School Public Health vicariously through Heather in that project, since SPH is a big user and will be a big user in the future. So on the last slide on SRDC, these are just some details. It is designed for a wide range of use cases. So big data, small data. There are sort of two components to the platform. So there's the high performance computing side of it, which is currently being finalized and being completed and will be available as part of the launch. And then there is a virtual machine part, which is already available and been up and running since I think last fall, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And then there is, of course, a data storage element that's sort of linked in with that. The idea, again, is that this complements some of the other research IT services we have that handle P3, P4, or P2, P3 data, which is sort of less sensitive. So Savio, AOD, and REDCap at this point are all good for P3, P2. But SRDC, again, it sort of adds that with the P4, rounds that out with the P4 protection. So as it relates to data management plans, to bring it all back, SRDC is an example of something that you can write into you can include in your data management plan as it relates to systems or tools that you'll use in research, specifically around data analysis, computing, and storage. So we are more than happy to help contribute language for inclusion of SRDC or any of our other tools and systems into a data management plan if you're writing it up, or a grant application and any other point where you might need more details. We're happy to help with that. There will be ongoing communication about SRDC as it sort of officially launches in the near term, both to School Public Health and the broader campus. And we're happy to answer questions about it now or in the future. And you can contact us by a variety of different sources. So on the next slide, I have the final slide. We do have an email address, researchdata@berkeley.edu, which you can feel free to email at any time. We also have a website. And we do have drop-in, or you can schedule time in our Zoom office hours. We hold those weekly on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Again, some of you may be familiar, but I can drop the links to those in the chat or information about that in the chat. But we're happy to meet you at any way that's easiest for you to get in contact with us. And I think with that, I will say thank you. And this is our presentation. I will also probably stop the recording at this point.